Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs.
Welcome to part 2 of our podcast, Effective Literacy Teaching in High Schools. Now, on with the show.
You know, and I think, so that kind of brings us to the second point that I made some time ago now, which was, you know, kids losing their motivation. So it's not just a matter of skill, it's like not having the motivation to write. And, you know, gee, I don't know whether I'd want to write either, Phil, if I'm writing yet again a response to an acronym, being told make sure you use the Texas paragraph or the Peel paragraph or the Teal paragraph.
And that starts in primary school too, where, you know, certain structures are taught and we don't go further than those, you know, persuasive or, you know, we've got to go much broader.
That's exactly where it starts. So the genre movement, you know, which I loved at the time because it reminded us that there's more than one reason to write. But I think teachers, thanks to publishers usually, got hung up on the structure. The theory behind genre was actually about purpose, that writing changes according to purpose. But it seems we all interpreted it as, oh, there are structures. Every genre has a structure. And that's not what the genre theorists were saying. Genre theorists were saying, think about the purpose of the writing. And the purpose of the writing is likely going to influence the structures that you choose. Not just the text structures that you choose, but also the sentence structures that you choose, or the way you organize your paragraphs, or the words that you choose. They certainly didn't say, and there will be one structure that you shall use for all time, because that's not true. Right? You know, narratives are not just orientations, complications, and resolutions. In fact, they kind of rarely are. You know, they have all sorts of complicated structures. So we kind of fell down a hole, and I'm going to blame publishers quite a bit for this because they put out all of these templates of structures, of the same structure, ways to use the same structure in 100 ways with your students. And it just kind of left us all thinking, okay, so there's one way to write a narrative. There's one way to write a persuasive piece. And as a consequence, we've got kids still in year 9 for their persuasive writing that everybody's doing because it's in that plan, writing, in my opinion, firstly, secondly, thirdly, in conclusion, it's like, there's more than that. There's more than one way to write a persuasive piece. So we've been kind of beguiled by the structure and do nothing else. And purpose trumps structure. Yeah.
And we're doing this structure every year from early primary school right through, and they just get the same thing. You know, we need...
Yeah. I mean, Phil, how many times can you write the persuasive piece on why you should or shouldn't wear a school uniform? Honestly.
So there goes.
They don't like writing. When
I was going to say, there goes your motivation to write, really, down the tube. But we've got so many examples of ways to write in beautiful literature or in non-fiction as well. The examples are there, you know.
They are, and very often. So I talk a lot with primary school teachers about using really beautiful literature and for narrative writing, and then you find out, wow, there are so many ways to structure a narrative when you start looking at beautiful literature, because, you know, there are so many ways to structure. Purpose trumps structure. Find something that fulfilled purpose, then go and examine its structure, and then you'll find out, there's a world out there, and writing becomes an exciting adventure for how you're going to structure this story that you have in your mind, because you've kind of built up this huge well of ways in which you could structure this engaging narrative. And the same is just as true in persuasive writing. So the three big purposes are to entertain, to persuade, or to inform. And so persuasive writing and informative writing also have really innovative and interesting structures. I'm always really, it's kind of funny when teachers are saying to me, oh, yeah, I love the idea of using narratives to really great narratives to show kids new ways of writing narratives. And then they say, but we've also got to do persuasive writing. So could you recommend some really good examples of persuasive writing? Where would we find these mentor texts? And I always say, you know, where you find a good persuasive mentor text, you have your own ears and antennae up for any time you read something that persuaded you. Any time that stopped and made you think and thought, you know what, I had not thought of that. Okay. Now, that's a really different way of thinking than what teachers are normally thinking. Normally, teachers are thinking, I need a really good model of a persuasive text. And what they go looking for is a persuasive text that has the structure of statement of the thesis, first argument, second argument, third argument, call to action. And that, so they have structure in their head. And the reason they can't find that when they go looking is because clearly it's probably not a very effective persuasive structure. If it was, it'd exist out there, right? So, you know, think purpose. When did something persuade you?
Fantastic.
So the best places to go are to any activist site that it's their job to persuade people. Right? Any political site, it's their job to persuade people.
Absolutely.
So unpack those. You know, go to World Wildlife Foundation, go to
Greenpeace,
you know, anything, RSPCA, anybody who's trying to make you change your behaviour, go to them.
Yep. Incredible.
It's their bread and butter to write good persuasive pieces.
That's right. So it's really the enthusiasm for writing, we can bring that back if we become the authentic teacher where we are in control of what we're teaching the children, not necessarily following the publisher. I'm sure publishers have got great intentions, but it tends to lock us into certain things, doesn't it?
Yeah, and in the secondary sector, I just think it brings the joy back, not just for the kids, but for secondary teachers to kind of revel again in the thing that they loved in the first place.
Yeah.
So those art teachers, they reveled in their visual art practice and they loved it, and they loved talking about it, and they loved reading about it, and they loved investigating how that artist did it and why that artist did it. And if they just find their way back into that, they will give their kids everything their kids need to know how to write and think like an artist, in their reflection on their own work, in their responses to other people's work. And so that's true for every single discipline. I think there's such joy lay ahead for secondary teachers to approach this idea of being responsible for the language of their discipline, and to kind of take off this burden that we've put upon them that somehow they're responsible for the English of the kids. And so, look, I've walked into schools where I've seen all teachers have been told, work persuasive writing into your assessment pieces. You know, so the tech teachers are trying to get persuasive writing in there. The science teachers are trying to get persuasive writing. Everybody's trying to get persuasive writing in there. Now, persuasive writing may well be a component. In tech, I may want to persuade in a marketing plan why my new product is, you know, worth selling, but that's not the kind of persuasive writing they're being asked to do. They're all being asked to do this kind of NAT plan prep. I want a statement of the thesis, first argument, second argument. So they're given all of these kind of English strategies to use, and that don't feel happy with it because it doesn't feel authentic. Discipline teachers can do fantastic work by staying inside their discipline. It's more authentic for the kids. It's more authentic for the teachers. It gives you much more motivation as a teacher to kind of sit down and examine how language is working in your discipline.
Yeah.
It makes much more sense to you because it doesn't take up all of your content teaching time. It slots in naturally with your content teaching time.
So is NAPLAN problematic in how it's influencing high schools, or?
Look, the thing I think that's problematic about NAPLAN is how much notice everybody takes of it.
Oh yeah.
Like if people didn't take any notice of it, and once upon a time we didn't. We didn't take any notice of it. Like I when my kids were going through school, there were times, and I'm a teacher, when I didn't even know they were taking NAPLAN.
Yeah, yeah.
But that all changed around 2011 when my school came out.
I think that's more of the problem, isn't it, than the actual NAPLAN? Yep.
Yeah, because that made everybody take notice of it, and it made people take notice of it in the wrong way. So suddenly teachers were teaching to it. You don't need to teach to NAPLAN. If you're doing good writing teaching, your kids will go fine on NAPLAN. Yep. Because when teachers start teaching to NAPLAN, my observation is that everybody teaches to the structure, right? So we get these kind of firstly, secondly, thirdly, in conclusion, or we get this really kind of orientation, complication, resolution thing happening. And the problem with that, Phil, is that constitutes 4 marks out of 47.
Yeah.
There's one criteria for text structure, and it's worth 4 marks.
That's not a lot, is it?
So they're teaching to 4 marks and forgetting the other 43. And the other 43 are audience, purpose, cohesion, vocabulary, sentence structures. These are all of the other things that don't get paid attention to because we're kind of stuck on repeating this template over and over again. So there is so much to be gained from just reveling in the joy of written communication in the disciplines. So much, because the kids will be joyful about writing. They'll become more skillful in their writing because of their engagement with authentic texts, with teachers who are genuinely excited about the text they're using with their kids. Like the payoffs are going to be enormous if we could just kind of get back to, I don't know, the joy of writing, Phil, because it's a crying shame. If kids think that writing is boring, then that's on us. We did that because there is nothing intrinsically boring about writing. It is the most fabulous human invention. It's a wondrous invention.
It's incredible, isn't it, really? Reading and writing, but writing is just incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's so many examples of amazing writing out there. We, as teachers, just need to connect children or students to it.
Exactly. And secondary school kids, you know what? People say, they're just on their phones all the time. You know what? I have never met a more socially engaged generation in my life. Like I remember myself as a teenager. I didn't even know what the news was, let alone engage anything in the news. But these kids know what's going on, and so many of them care about what's going on. They're not disengaged from life and big issues.
No.
So just get those life and authentic big issues part of what we do with them, because, there's such a benefit in being able to communicate these big ideas and needs and wants that teenagers have, to be able to communicate it in multiple ways. And so one of those ways is in their text messaging with their mates, which is why I'm happy for them to be doing that kind of literacy. But I also want to give them the skills, the repertoire to be able to engage in writing that will make adults pick their ears up and take notice, that will find its way onto the Washington posts or New York Times, blog sites so that other people can read them. So I really want my students, I want our students to be able to use the full repertoire of communication, because we desperately need them to be communicating effectively, kind of to save the world into the future. So, writing is not just this thing that we wish they would do better so our NAPLAN scores would go up.
No.
Writing is this incredibly important communication tool. It was an amazing invention when it came along about 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, yep.
And you know what? For almost all of those 5,000 years, it's been in the hands of the privileged.
Yes,
It's only since public education has been a thing.
Yes.
So only 120 years or so that it's been in the hands of the people.
Yep.
It's so important for democracy that we give our kids the full benefit of what good writing is, what it means to be able to efficiently, effectively, engagingly communicate with the written word. And the beauty of writing, it was the magic of its invention. It meant that your words and thoughts could stay around.
Yeah.
Now, that was the amazing invention of writing.
Incredible, wasn't it?
Because otherwise, words just went into the ether.
Yeah.
So now it was there for all time for others to read and reflect on. So I've just kind of been listening to the kind of the writing of Bede, who's considered the first kind of English historian from more than 1,000 years ago. And it's so interesting to kind of read his reflections of life at that time. And I think that's amazing that I can do that because of writing.
Yep.
That's how I get these amazing little insights into what was going on 1,500 years ago.
Yeah. We can read what Aristotle was thinking.
Yeah.
And
it's incredible.
And that led to the whole Renaissance where, we rediscovered these incredible thinkers who thought about it in a non-religious way, how the world is viewed.
Yeah. So you said, why do we not pass these magical things on to kids to let them know what this is all about, I think we forget all of that kind of magic. When we kind of enter, and that story begins way back in primary school.
Yeah,
I know that when kids enter into their foundation year, they get that writing's magic because I can see the wonder in their eyes. But gosh, we seem to teach the magic out of it pretty darn quickly.
Yeah, so it's all about, I guess, professional learning for teachers, really, isn't it? Like their own professional learning, or having somebody help them, or readings, but it's about I'm just thinking about how a teacher can take action to get themselves.
It definitely is about professional learning.
Yeah.
So if any of your podcast listeners have ever heard me speak before, they'll know that this is. I strongly believe in the power of a teacher, and that all of our money that's spent on programs is wasted money.
Yeah.
That all of that money should go into the professional learning of teachers, not because teachers don't know stuff. Teachers know lots.
Yeah.
But teachers, all of us need this ongoing learning. There is nothing static about our profession. The world changes and we change in order to prepare our kids for the changing world. So professional learning should just be the natural go-to. Every system in this country should be putting all of their money and efforts into the continued professional learning of teachers. Teachers want it, right? So teachers aren't shying away from professional learning. It's systems, I think, that think, it'd be quicker to buy a program and have the teachers all do that. We kind of want teachers to have the skills and the confidence to look at the language around them and think, I can see what I want to do with that. So really recently, I was working with food tech teachers
Right.
Our old home ec teachers.
Yep.
And they had come up with a brilliant idea. They're both young food tech teachers. And they'd come up with a really brilliant idea, I felt, to really engage the kids in the unit of work that they were doing. So the ultimate aim, the big assessment piece, if you like, was they had to develop a recipe that they would then market. So in the marketing program, they wanted the kids to be able to talk about what the nutritional values of this food is that they had invented, but also all of the other things that you think about when you're trying to, does it affect your lifestyle? How do you make it a cool thing so that everybody wants it? So I thought it was a really rich and wonderful thing to do with kids in food technology. But, of course, they were saying to me, what sort of writing do we need to do with the kids for this, right? And I said, well, let's have a look at people who do that kind of thing, people who make new products and then sell them to the world, right? And so we kind of went on to a heap of entrepreneurial sites to look at, new companies set up by Indigenous groups selling new Indigenous foods, companies selling new non-alcoholic drinks. Like there's a whole lot of entrepreneurs out there who on their websites do the kinds of thing that these food tech teachers wanted their kids to do. They have a section on, why this is healthy and good for you, what the nutritional value is, what protein you get from it. And then they also have and this is why it's cool, this is it'll do this. And then it has a section on, and it's fantastic for the environment because of blah, 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 blah. So that becomes your model text, right?
Yeah.
And then the food tech teachers, of course, they can then partner up with the other tech teachers who are teaching coding and graphic design, because then that can become part of that assignment as well. So now kids can work on an assignment that covers off two of their subject areas when they're getting input from both of those subject areas to create something. And then it has a real purpose because they came up with a great idea that the kids would then kind of present this in a kind of a dragon's den kind of a way to the canteen managers, so that the canteen managers could decide whether they would take on this new product that had been invented and put it into the canteen.
Fantastic. Another area where secondary teachers see problems is students with low literacy levels in the high school, and then because they've got so much content to cover, they find that very difficult. Well,
it's definitely a question I get asked all of the time, and my response is really counterintuitive for teachers.
Yep.
So teachers are saying to me, "Oh, but I can't do a lab report with them because they can barely read and write." And I say, "Well, what's the alternative? What are you going to do with them then?"
Yep.
So I say to them, "Well, you should do a lab report with them then." And then the way that you teach the kids lab report writing, if we put enough scaffolds in there, the kids will be able to use your modelled writing as their model for their own writing in lab report writing.
Yep.
So contrary to what I think teachers might think I might say, which is, oh, okay, here's a program that'll fill the gaps that you perceive.
Yeah.
I say, well, no, let's just teach them what they need to write here, but our instruction will fill the gaps instead. So we'll put a few extra little scaffolds in for these kids, but they still will be writing lab reports at the end.
Yeah.
So in English, when they say, oh, these kids can never do Shakespeare, but we're supposed to do Shakespeare in this unit, but these kids won't be doing Shakespeare. I'll just get them to watch the movie 10 Things I Hate About You instead. Or they won't write a response. I'll just get them to do an acrostic poem with Shakespeare written down the side. So they just kind of really lower their expectations, and I completely get why they do it, because it seems too overwhelming to do anything else. The kids seem so far behind, they can't imagine how they could ever catch them up.
Yeah.
But my response is always, no, we will teach these kids the content that you need to teach them, and we will find extra scaffolds to build those kids into the understanding. So if you're doing The Tempest, for example, we will allow these kids to watch a really good animated version of The Tempest so that they have a really clear understanding of what The Tempest is about.
All about, that's great.
And with that background knowledge, we will then engage in one component of The Tempest, the part that's most related to your assessment piece, which is about taking a character and talking about his motivations. So we might just take this passage where Prospero is talking, and that's the passage that we'll look at really closely. And they already understand who Prospero is. They already understand his motivations. They already understand this need for revenge because they already understand the story. So just reading one small part then is really accessible. And then our next thing that we want to scaffold them into is how to write that response around character motivation. But the truth is I need to do that with my entire class because I don't have any kids in my year 7 or year 8 who know how to write a response with an explanation of character motivation. So I'm going to do that for everyone. And I might do some extra little scaffolds for words you can use to refer back into the text, like these words from Prospero illustrate his motivation for creating the storm, etc., etc.
That's great.
So I might unpack that, and we might look at the word illustrate because my low-level literacy learners have never even understood that illustrate could be used like that. If they've ever heard of it, they've heard of it like the illustrator of a book about pictures. They never really understood it as a metaphor before, never heard it used like that. But the truth is, Phil, not many of the kids in my class have heard the word used like that before either. So I'm going to talk about that with all of my kids. And at the end of the lesson, I've got a model of the writing, and my low-level kids have that to hang on to next time when it comes to assessment time, and I'm asking them to now look at Miranda as the character and tell me about her motivations. They can kind of go back and find some of those key words and those key structures and copy them. They're not copying the whole thing because they've got their own ideas about Miranda, but they're kind of copying the syntax, the grammatical structures, and some really key words. But my other kids, my more able kids might say, well, thanks for showing me that. And I've got some ideas too. And so, they may only half glance at that work we did a couple of weeks ago. But I know that my low-level kids will go back to it and look really closely at it and use those structures to help themselves write their couple of sentences in response to Miranda's motivations. And the beauty of making sure that these kids got to be part of the conversations about Miranda and Prospero on the island was that these kids might have struggles with literacy, but they are not dumb.
No.
They have ideas.
Yeah.
Very often they've lived experiences of rage or vendetta or jealousy. Of course they have contributions that are wonderful to make to the big discussions about character motivation. And very often they never get to show that because, they got sidled over onto the corner into the streamed class down the bottom where they just got given Shakespeare written down the side vertically and they had to come up with words.
Yeah.
And sometimes teachers say, but, I don't want to over scaffold them. Like I don't want to be like their crutch so that they use my stuff all of the time. And I just think that we might be overthinking that that's what happens. Generally, kids use the scaffold because they need it.
Yeah.
And they stop using the scaffold when they don't need it.
Yeah. They can choose.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just making a connection with foundation children, that we might think they can't read, but actually they come to school with amazing knowledge about their world.
Yeah.
Oh,
and honestly, the kids that we're thinking, they're from such a problematic background, and like we do a lot of feeling sorry for kids when they come in, and kind of use that as an excuse for why they're not doing well with their reading and writing.
Yeah.
They just don't have any support at home, or they've missed a lot of school, or all of these things, which could well be true. but, don't imagine that doesn't mean that they don't know stuff. In fact, very often the life that they lead means that they know lots of stuff. And when it comes to Shakespeare, oh boy, have they got a lot of insights into what Shakespeare was really talking about in his play.
Yeah. So streaming seems to happen more in high school, but that's problematic too, isn't it?
Yeah, really problematic. Well, you know what? Luckily, a lot of the schools I work in don't do streaming.
Right.
But the problem with streaming is that it kind of almost you fulfill your destiny. You get put in that group, and then
You're
because
labelled.
of the work you get given in that group, you spin your wheels there.
Yeah.
You never get to go beyond what you're given. Because.
Yeah.
How can you prove to somebody that you can read Shakespeare if you've never been put in a class where you've been taught to read Shakespeare?
Yeah.
So it's a dooming kind of thing to stream kids like that, because you immediately are lowering your expectations of those kids. So teachers often say, yeah, but how else could we differentiate for these kids? And I think that's a misinterpretation of differentiation. So differentiation should not be about differentiating content.
Yeah.
That's not what differentiation is supposed to be about. Differentiation is supposed to be about differentiating your instruction so everybody can access the same content.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for low-level kids, that just means putting more scaffolds into your teaching. But everybody should be doing the same content.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're guaranteed to leave kids behind. Mentioning teachers kind of not being enthused about a subject, there is a really big kind of a big systemic staffing problem in secondary schools, where there are many teachers who are teaching out of their subject area.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking to teachers about, pass on the love of your discipline,
Yeah.
the teacher's saying to me, yeah, but I'm not actually a geography teacher.
That's...
I didn't do geography. I'm a history person. I love history, but, so I'm in the humanities faculty, so somehow I find myself teaching geography. And so my advice to them is, fake it. Fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Because, I'm not a geography person either until I start reading about geography. And then I think, wow, that is super fascinating. That is really interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. So, just, find something in the area that you teach about and get enthused about it and fake it. And before you know it, you'll love it.
So when you go into a school, what's your initial thing you'll do? Just find out you'll speak to the teachers and the principal and about what they're doing, and then just really get the lie of the land, isn't it?
Yeah, I really like it. So secondary schools are less likely than primary schools to give over lots of sessions over a year or two.
Yeah.
But I do work with some high schools, secondary schools that have that long-term vision, and a couple of also I work with a couple of kind of sectors who do that as well. So, all credit to those systems for having kind of a long-term view of how we might affect some change in secondary school.
Yep.
So the first thing I do is I like to know how that school operates, because secondary schools are all a little different. Their timetables all work a little differently. They divide up how they teach their subjects a little differently. So I kind of want to feel what that feels like in a school. And in systems that have kind of bought into a long-term project, I like to spend time in the school, just kind of going from classroom to classroom, because I want to understand the kids. I want to see how they operate. Even the way that kids sit in classrooms is kind of interesting to me to understand what we might be able to do kind of moving on. I like to see what schools have put around the classroom walls, because it gives me an indication of what they've tried in the past or the direction that they're currently taking, so all that sort of thing.
Yep.
And then I talk to the leadership teams, and most secondary schools have like leaders of learning, kind of like faculty heads, I guess, who kind of lead the learning in the faculty.
Yep.
And a lot of secondary schools increasingly have instructional leaders who kind of do instructional stuff across the faculty. So they're a good person to connect to as well, because, I'm not there all of the time. So we're trying to find people who work across faculties who can kind of watch what's going on. But then my most important thing I say to a secondary school is, I need to work with your faculties separately.
Okay.
I can't do PL to your whole school because the reality is, while I'm giving science examples, English has tuned out.
Yep.
And when I'm giving poetry examples, everybody except English has tuned out. So, even if I'm thinking, but what I'm showing you here, you could apply it across to your area, that's just not going to happen. They're not going to make that effort. No. So I say you have to find a way for me to speak to your faculty separately, so that when I'm showing them examples, that they're directly relevant to those teachers. And the second thing, if I'm working in a school with a school long term, kind of over a year or two, which I have with a few secondary schools, I ask if they're looking to affect long-term change, then I say I'd like to start with your Year 7 team.
Yeah.
So if I want to work with your humanities teachers, and I want just the ones who teach Year 7 at the moment. Now, those Year 7 teachers probably teach Year 9 or Year 10 as well, but I'm saying we're going to focus on what you do in Year 7, because I'm trying to up the ante and set a tone for what happens in Year 7. For a start, almost every school I go to, I want to raise the level of their expectations of what they want Year 7 to do.
Okay.
I want them truly to be started to be apprenticed into what it means to think and write like an historian or an artist or a scientist.
I guess that's where the biggest jump needs to happen, isn't it?
And to me it seems like the perfect moment. It's a transition moment where the Year 7 kids are expecting something new anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So let's give them something new.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Now, is it hard to recommend resources or readings? Because really you're talking about excellent models of scientific writing and that sort of thing. But as far as people going, it is hard, isn't it?
It's hard.
Yeah.
So it's hard because there's quite a few readings around, articles around on disciplinary literacy. So just this idea of what we're talking about. We're not talking about generalised English strategies anymore. We're talking about strategies specific to discipline. Yep. And there's quite a lot of articles on that. But the truth is busy high school teachers kind of don't have time to read generally on the topic.
They want it specific.
Want very specific examples of how it works in how it would work in their discipline. So usually I just show them what other teachers have done.
Yeah. No, that's fabulous.
So, here's a model. Here's what these teachers at this school did. This is what it looked like over the term.
I guess once they see those sort of models, that makes it easier for them to then design their own. Yeah. And
it makes it believable. It's like, oh, okay. And the thing to show teachers is, and this is the difference it made to the kids' writing, and all teachers want that. So they all want the best for their kids, and they all want their kids to be better at this communication, this written communication. So when you can see the difference it makes, when you use authentic quality text, when you kind of teach from the joy and the heart of your discipline, and when you focus on teaching small little components explicitly, so when you go kind of deep but small and you spread that over the term, the results that you can get in your kids' writing are phenomenal. And when they see that in other teachers' work, then they say, you know what, I'm prepared to give it a go.
Yeah. No, that's fabulous. Well, thanks, Misty. It's been an amazing talk, and I love your positivity and your way of working, the way you think about the world of teaching. And
because teachers are the best people in the world.
They are. They're incredible. It's a big job. I might just, if you don't mind, ask you some, we call it rapid fire questions at the end. For a bit of
rapid fire. That means rapid answer. I'm really hopeless at rapid answers, Phil, but let's go.
How do you think you learned to read?
Oh, how did I learn to read? So my mother tells me that I could read before I went to school, and she has no idea how I did it.
Right. Okay.
So my mother was very young when she had me. So she had only just turned 17, and she was kind of not really, I'm going to say, probably not really tuned in to what it means to raise a child.
Was it?
But clearly I had books, and clearly somehow I figured it out.
And did you have another language or what?
No. So despite my very odd-sounding name, I'm just a good old Anglo-Celtic, in fact, Celtic background person.
Yeah.
A lot of convicts in my background, Phil.
Did you remember being read to as a child?
I don't really remember being read to, but I remember having a lot of books.
Yeah.
So clearly I was given lots of books and I was super engaged in them. In fact, I even remember as a moment of a really important book moment that sticks in my mind is I got put on a plane at Canberra airport when I was about 7 years old. So I was by myself to be sent down to stay with my mother's cousins in Melbourne. So my mother was originally from Melbourne. And it was back in the days when there was clearly no security. And a woman who used to be the cook in the pub that my grandfather ran in Queanbeyan, which is a town just outside of Canberra, came running up the stairs. And she said, "We forgot to give you this as a goodbye Christmas present," because I was going down for Christmas. Yeah. And it was a huge book called Storytime Treasury, and it was full of fairy tales written in the kind of original gory version of the fairy tales.
Oh, right.
It was a giant book.
Yep.
And I remember reading it all through. So I thanked Cook, and off she got off the plane again. And I read that Storytime Treasury over the Christmas holidays while I was down in Melbourne staying with cousins, and I still have the book now. And when I look at it, I think that was pretty darn good reading for a 7-year-old.
Fantastic. When do you best like to read?
Actually, I say this to secondary teachers a lot, actually, because we're often saying to teachers, we want to really teach kids the pleasure of reading. And so when teachers give that example, English teachers normally, they say, just getting lost in a book. And I can see a whole bunch of teachers in the kind of hall where I'm presenting thinking, getting lost in a book, not my thing. And it's true. Getting lost in a book is not everybody's thing. No. And so I like to remind everybody that pleasure reading isn't just about getting lost in a novel or getting lost in a fantasy. Pleasure reading can be reading for new understandings and new information and new learning. And I have to say that has been the majority of the kind of pleasure reading that I've done over the last decade and a half. Has just been kind of really, I find a lot of pleasure out of reading information books that tell me more about, where languages come from or the history of the Anglo-Saxons. Yeah, I love it. I love the history of the English language, of any language. So I may be a good old Celtic person, but I've always loved other languages, and so I learnt German at school, and then I learnt Italian at university, and then I married a Greek and lived in Greece, and so I learnt Greek. And then during lockdown, Phil, I made an effort to learn Arabic. So
wow!
I just really like languages.
My goodness, is Greek hard to learn?
I don't think it was hard to learn, but I was totally immersed in it, and I had. You may have understood, Phil, that I love to talk. And so when I was living in Greece, I was like, I've got to find a way to talk to people because I was not living my husband's from an area of Greece that doesn't have any tourists. And so if I wanted to talk, I had to learn Greek. So I was like, I'm going to learn Greek. And I'm not fearful of making mistakes. So I'm not a fearful language learner. So that also makes me not a particularly accurate language speaker. So I make lots of errors when I speak, but I'm very communicative. Yes.
And reading and writing Greek is different to the spoken, is it?
Yeah, so Greek is a Cyrillic alphabet, so I had to kind of learn a Cyrillic alphabet for Greek.
Yeah.
But, that was nothing compared to having to learn the Arabic alphabet.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how you did that one, but anyway.
Yeah, well, it was, lockdown was long, Phil, so.
Is Chinese the next one?
You know what? I've been to China a few times for work. So usually I work with schools in Hong Kong every January, and I've been to China a couple of times to work with schools there as well. And I've thought to myself, oh gosh, how difficult is it to learn Chinese? Because it sounds kind of difficult to me to hear the separate words. But when I've spoken to people over there, so expats who've learnt Chinese, they've said to me that it's not actually terribly hard to learn because it has quite a simple grammar.
Yeah.
So, I think learning to read it and write it would be hard, but maybe not so much learning to speak it.
Best tips for parents on helping their high school age child with literacy?
Parents of high school kids. What are my tips for you? Well, the least of your worries is whether your kids are reading and writing, probably. But I would say to parents of high school kids, don't panic that your kids are playing games all the time or that they're on their phones all the time. My youngest two, left teenagehood not very long ago, and I used to observe they're both of them are huge gamers, so they spend a lot of time on video games.
Yep.
So in my observations of them on games, I noted how much language work goes on there. So there's a lot of language in the games themselves. So lots of the games they play have a lot of text running along the bottom to kind of guide the game. But the thing that really impressed me about the language use is that they usually play these games in concert with other people online. And just watching them manage that, because they both speak to them online, but they constantly type instant messaging along the side of the game to the other players as well. Yep. So it's really kind of complex, orchestrated kind of repertoire of language use, of writing and reading and speaking. It's really fascinating to watch. And then when I lived in Greece, I often used to get sent kids who had been chucked out of English language schools. So kids in Greece, like in many foreign countries, go to specific private English schools after school. And I used to get the rejects. So they would come to me for private lessons because the English afternoon schools couldn't cope with them. And so my way in with them was to always ask them, can you think of any reason to want to learn English? And so this is an idea for parents here as well. Can you think of any reason that you would want to read and write? What would your reasons be? And then, so that's when, teenagers, recalcitrant Greek teenagers would say to me, well, I like Metallica. I'd like to be able to read I'd like to be able to understand their songs. Yep. And so then that would send me down, into the internet looking for Metallica lyrics and then finding out that, actually Metallica lyrics are really poetic. Yep. And I could definitely do this work with this kid to re-engage him back into reading and writing. Yep. So I think the same thing for kind of, any of our teenagers who seems like they've withdrawn from reading and writing, to say, what would you be interested in? So at school, are you really into, Formula One driving? Can we get some magazines that kind of really tackle things that you're really interested in? Are you super into rugby? How about we read Wayne Bennett's autobiography, because I hear he's an amazing coach and he has such insights into rugby. So, we just kind of tap back into what would their motivation be? What would they, if they could, what would they really wish that they could read? Would like to know that.
Fantastic. A key message for high school teachers.
Key message for high school teachers. Remember how much you loved your subject. Yeah. Remember it was the thing that motivated you to do that undergrad degree. Remember that? Yeah. And then remember when you thought, you know what, I'd really like to pass this knowledge on to other people. And so you decided that you'd do that extra year and that education part to add to your degree, and you were going to change the world, and you were going to make kids really interested in science. And remember that?
Yeah.
Well, you can have that again. Find that again.
Yeah.
So remember the teacher that you really wanted to be, the thing that motivated you. I promise you, you find that again, and then teaching becomes joyful again.
Yeah.
And then you pass that on to your kids, and it's just fun then. It's just fun.
Yeah. Exciting, wondrous parts of your career.
Almost all of it's been exciting and wondrous.
Yeah.
I've had a really blessed career. It's been amazing. I graduated back in the day, so back in the 80s, when there was huge unemployment for teachers. And in fact, of my year that graduated, almost all of them are now highly paid public servants, or just retiring, in fact, because they couldn't find work as teachers. And I myself went overseas and found work as a teacher overseas, hence I was teaching in Greece. And that was very exciting, just kind of finding myself in a new world, in a new place, in a new language, and kind of understanding, what teaching's all about, and having a lot of freedom over there, I have to say. And then coming back, and then I taught intensive English centres, so I taught new arrivals into Australia, and that was one of the most rewarding things ever in my life, but it also taught me to be a really good teacher, because it really helped me to understand how to slow down the teaching. And look carefully for evidence of when knowledge was gained, when learning had happened, and then build the next step. Those kids did the best thing for me. But, 20, 30 years later, I still get letters from those kids.
Yeah.
I say, I remember you taught me English when I came to this country. So we were good for each other. So those were pretty wondrous moments.
I think you learn more about pedagogy when you've got a bigger range of learners in your class. I had a Year 7 class once where they decided to bring some of the special ed children into each classroom, and I had 7 students in Year 7 that were at Year 1 level, and then I had all these others that ranged from Year 4 up to Year 10 level. And so what do you do as a young teacher? And it really challenges you, doesn't it? What
You know what those kids do for you, though? Because they're usually slowly taking on the learning, so they slow it down. It's like they make the learning process visible for us. Very often with capable kids, you're just thinking, I don't even know how you got that, but, thank goodness you did. But kids who really need these extra supports, it's like they're playing it out for you in real time, and you get these real insights into how learning happens. Makes you a better teacher.
I started to think about, how do kids learn? What are some great principles behind good learning? Well, thanks so much, Misty, for all your insights. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today.
Bye, everyone. Thanks a lot, Phil.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.